In this video, I'm going to cover the weighted average method in a process costing system. And I'm covering a very similar example to problem 416, which is the last problem in your set A2. And this is a very comprehensive problem that covers the whole weighted average method. So this company manufactures a caulking compound and it's got multiple stages or goes through different departments, but we're going to focus on the cooking department, its first department. We're going to focus on the month of May. Now, in our table here, we've got information at the top that covers the amount of units or pounds of this caulking material. So we've got beginning work in process inventory, which is just the incomplete units as of May 1st is 66,000 pounds. How many new pounds were added into the process during May, which is 310,000. But fortunately, we've got a question mark for how many pounds were actually completed and transferred out. And we don't mean finished as far as the whole entire company. We just mean finished as far as the cooking department and transferred to the next or second department. We do have ending work in process inventory on May 31st or incomplete units as of May 31st as 26,000 pounds. But we can solve for this question mark, can't we? So let's think about the relationship between these four numbers. Beginning work in process inventory plus the product that we start or add in has to be equal to the combination of any work in process inventory plus completed units. And logically, it makes sense. What we start with that's incomplete plus what we add in new, what would be available basically, is either going to still be in inventory and incomplete as part of ending work in process inventory or going to be finished as far as this department and moved on to the next step. So we can just start plugging in numbers. Beginning work in process inventory, 66,000 pounds. Product started, 310,000 pounds. Ending work in process inventory, 26,000 pounds. We don't know completed units. We just start to manipulate this with algebra and move it around, and we've got completed units are 350,000. And we can go ahead and fill this in our table now. Now, I'll forewarn you, there may be one of these pieces of information that they don't give you in a problem on your sets or your exam or your extra credit. So be prepared to either solve for the number of units completed and transferred out or ending work in process inventory. That might be something that you have to solve for. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and move on to our very first step in the process, which is just figuring out equivalent units of production. Ultimately, our second stage is getting our unit product cost, which seems like, on the surface, we would take our total cost, divide it by the number of units. But in particular, they're telling us to calculate something called equivalent units of production. So let's start to think about, what might be numbers that we need to include within that. And it seems logical, again, if we're going to divide this into our total cost to get unit cost, that maybe these two numbers here, like the 350,000 pounds completed, or maybe perhaps the ending work in process, maybe those numbers. So is equivalent units equal to the units completed? And in here, that would be 350,000. No, that's not good enough because we didn't just use our resources and cost and resources to just only finish units. We also had some that are incomplete that we need to consider. Well, another alternative is equivalent units just simply the incomplete units or those units in ending work in process inventory, and that would be 26,000 here. Again, all the costs and resources that we didn't just produce incomplete units or ending work in process inventory, it also produced units that were transferred out. So option 2 isn't going to be what we're looking for with equivalent units. Well, maybe it's the completed units plus the just raw number of ending work in process pounds, and that would be 350,000 plus 26,000 equal 376,000. Maybe that's what we divide into the total cost to get unit costs. We're getting closer, but that's yet another strike. What that doesn't consider, the good part of this is it does consider the completed units, but it treats these incomplete 26,000 pounds as if they were really finished, and they're not actually finished. So we need to convert those in some way to What's the equivalent? If we took all our time and resources and actually finished units instead of producing units that were incomplete, what would that be equivalent to? So our total equivalent units of production is going to include not only our units completed and transferred to the next department, but again, we're going to take that ending work in process and convert it to equivalent units for work in process and add that to units transferred out. So let's go ahead and do this step by step. I will note that you'll see that I'm doing this differently for materials and conversion. And the reason why is if I go to my example and I look at ending work in process inventory, the units have a different completion percentage related to materials and conversion. And that makes sense because you add these at different times. You may say, in this example, yeah, I added 70% of the materials, but I had only gotten 30% of the labor and overhead. Because of that, when we're doing these calculations of units and unit costs and costs, we're going to have to do this separately between materials and conversion. So let's start to walk through this and understand where I got the numbers here. First step is I just said, hey, I want to add in the number of units completed and transferred to the next department. That's 350,000 no matter if we're talking about materials or conversion. So same number there. But the difference in where we go to here is in the ending work in process inventory. You'll see I started with both the number of pounds, that the raw number of pounds, 26,000, but I multiplied it times the percentage of completion. For materials, that's 70% complete. So 70% times 26,000 is 18,200. I add that to the 350,000 completed and transferred to the next department, and I get total equivalent units of production for material only of 368,200. I look at conversion. Again, the 26,000 pounds of incomplete work in process inventory, I'm going to multiply that times the conversion completion percentage of 30%, 26,000 times 30%, and this time I get 7,800. So again, if I think about this, I can make equivalent 26,000 incomplete ending work in process inventory. If I'd taken that same conversion, labor and overhead, and actually finished units off, it's equivalent to 7,800 ending work in process inventory that would actually be complete. I'll take that 7,800 plus the 350,000, and my total equivalent units of production for conversion is 357,800. And again, you notice that these are different numbers, and again, notice that I've converted ending work in process inventory to equivalent units. So let's keep moving on in this particular example. The second step, this is another scary one that has multiple steps, hang on, is to calculate the cost per equivalent unit. So I've got my information up here that I already calculated. Now I'm going to start to step through this. Ultimately, I'm dividing equivalent units of production into costs. And here's my cost data. And I've got it listed separately for beginning work in process inventory, the material cost, the conversion cost. Also, the cost that was added in during the month, again, separately for materials and conversion. Again, I'm going to break this down into two separate columns. The cost of beginning work in process inventory, 68,300, added to the cost of material added in, 355,130, gives us a total cost of material of 423,430. Same thing for conversion. Beginning work in process for conversion, 19,300, plus conversion cost added in, 105,930. Add those two numbers together and I get total cost of conversion of 125,230. Now, for this second step, that's just part A of the second step. That's total cost. Ultimately, I want unit cost or an average cost per unit. So I'm going to take that total cost and divide it by the equivalent units of production that I calculated in step one. For example, material total cost of 423,430 divided by equivalent units of production of 368,200 gives me a cost per equivalent unit for materials of $1.15. That's the average cost of materials for each unit. Conversion, total cost of 125,230 divided by equivalent units of production of 357,800 is a cost per equivalent unit for conversion of 35 cents. Again, this is great. This is average information. Ultimately, I'm going to use this next, these costs per equivalent unit, to apply my costs to ending work in process inventory and also the cost of units transferred out. This information I have listed here above to the right is everything that I've already solved for, that I've summarized that. And what I'm going to focus on first is number 3, calculating the cost of ending work in process inventory. And I've just circled here in red what seems like information that I already solved for before that I'm going to utilize in calculating that information. Equivalent units in ending work in process inventory to get the actual number of units and the cost per equivalent unit. So again, I'm going to do this separately first, material and conversion. The equivalent units for material that we already calculated in step 1 was 18,200. I'm going to multiply that times the cost per equivalent unit of materials in step 2 of $1.15, and I get material costs only in ending work in process inventory of 20,930. Similar for conversion. Equivalent units in ending work in process inventory for conversion of 7,800 times the cost per equivalent unit of 35 cents is conversion costs in ending work in process inventory, so incomplete units of May 31st of 2,730. If I add together material and conversion costs, 20,930 plus 2,730, I get total cost of ending work in process inventory, all combined, everything, of 23,660. Now, I'll tell you one hint of where I find a lot of students go wrong within this process is they calculated cost per equivalent unit right, and they start to apply that, and they accidentally use the 26,000 or non-equivalent units in ending work in process inventory, just the raw amount of units, instead of the equivalent units in ending work in process inventory. So make a mental note of that. You don't want to go wrong in that step. So now I've solved for ending work in process inventory. I'm going to go after the cost of the units that were actually finished as of cooking department and transferred to the next department. So again, I'm going to start to look at what seems relevant. Cost per equivalent unit still is information I need. I can use that for both work in process and units completed. But this time I'm looking at completed units, and that's the same for each of these. It's 350,000 pounds of this caulking material. So we'll start to fill this in. Materials, 350,000 units or pounds times the cost per equivalent unit of $1.15 is the cost of material and completed units is 402,500. Similar for conversion, same number of units, 350,000, but this time times a different cost per equivalent unit of 35 cents gets me a cost of conversion in completed units of 122,500. Add that to the material, 402,500, and I get a total cost of units transferred to the next department between material and conversion of 525,000. So ultimately, I've solved for the information. This is what I was looking for. I'm like, what's the amount of inventory that's incomplete that's going to be on my balance sheet? 23,660. And on the other hand, what's the amount of, as far as transfer to the next department, is 525,000. Now, a good fifth step is to reconcile this information to our beginning cost data. And the reason why I say that that's good is if you made a mistake somewhere with your calculation, you might not recognize it until you do the reconciliation to go, whoops, I don't know where I went wrong, but I know I went wrong somewhere. So the cost reconciliation, we're going to start with all the costs we started with. That in our beginning work in process inventory plus that which we added in. So I just summarized and added together the material and conversion costs in beginning inventory to get a total cost in beginning work in process inventory of 87,600. The total cost added to production during the period is just simply this material cost of 355,130 plus the conversion cost of 105,930 is the 461.60. I add cost of beginning inventory, costs added during production, and I get total costs accounted for that I need to account for to be accounted for of 548,660. So I need to account for that and make sure somehow that combination went to either ending work in process inventory or units complete. So let's make sure. Let's go back to the information we saw for in steps 3 and 4, where we had cost and ending work in process inventory and cost completed, and just fill this in. So now we're going to account for this cost as follows. Total cost of work in process inventory ending is 23,660. Cost of units completed and transferred out is 525,000. If I add together ending work in process inventory and units complete, voila, I accounted for 548,660. What I needed to account for, I did actually account for as follows, and those numbers agree. So I know that it appears that I have solved this correctly. One thing that I didn't mention, I was going through just another hint of where I see sometimes students go wrong, is you'll notice the beginning work in process inventory, they gave you percentage of completion. And a lot of times because you give you that, you feel like you need to do something with it. Under the weighted average approach, while we do need to consider the percentage of completion of ending inventory, we completely ignore the beginning inventory percentage of completion for our beginning work in process inventory. That's just the nature of weighted average. It's like I'm going to treat everything the same no matter what particular layer.